So the car is shifting really harshly. Let me show you that. Oh, there's one. Really harsh shift. That's 1 to 2. So I'm having the harsh 1 to 2 shifts, and I'm having an intermittent P1744. Now just real briefly, I cover this way more detail in my other video, but you have an engine, transmission, and a torque converter. The torque converter is like 2 fans aimed at each other with one fan hooked up to the engine, and as the engine turns, it shoots fluid at the fan that's hooked up to the transmission. That allows the engine to idle without turning the wheels of the car. But anyways, to increase the fuel economy, they have a clutch here that locks in and locks the engine to the transmission to improve fuel economy. And what the P1744 means is that it's detecting slippage, more than 100 RPM slip, when this should be engaged between the two halves. So I had this problem 1.5 years ago. It was actually a continuous P1744, and I ended up running a ton of tests. I go through that, all through that in the other videos. And I replaced the torque converter, the axle seals, the fluid, and the internal filter. And then 1.5 years later, now it's back as an intermittent P1744. So I ran all of the tests I saw in the previous video, and there isn't a problem. You know, anytime this comes on, I immediately plug in my scanner and I check if there's any slippage, and there isn't any. So it's something that's intermittent. So the problem is that the early 1997 Ford Escorts, they have a cable on them that can affect transmission pressure. So what's happening now is that cable has gotten out of adjustment, and according to the Sonic's website, high line pressure causes the pressure regulator valve to restrict converter charge, a torque converter charge. So let's adjust that cable. Alright, squeeze the clip, pull it off. Squeeze the clip, pull it off. Pop this here. Wiggle it back and forth. Come right off. Undo this, pull it off. Pull it off, set it aside. There you go. So move this tubing out of the way. Just pinch this and pull it back. Pinch this here and pull it back. And pull out the tubing. There you go. And now you'll have access to the plugs on the side of the transmission. Okay, you can see there's 3 plugs down here. 1, 2, 3. And we want to get access to this one right here on the top right. It's the one in the middle of the 3 plugs. We're working next to the fan, so it's a really good idea to disconnect it just for safety. Just pull that off there. It's a 7mm open-ended wrench to break it loose. And then for ease of unscrewing it, you can use a 8mm. Before fully removing it, you should definitely clean off the area from all that dirt and grease, because you don't want that going into your transmission or potentially into your gauge. So here's the setup I purchased. It's a 0 to 300 psi gauge. Generally, gauges are the most accurate in the mid-range of this style of gauge, but this transmission can go to about 252 psi to about 72 psi at idle. I was sure when I bought my hose that it was rated for 300 psi. We have these adapters here. These adapters are kind of neat because they can swivel, and you also don't need to use a hose clamp on here. You just need to slide it on, and then it's a permanent connection. You can see the nut can continue to spin even though it's on the hose. That way you don't have to wind up your hose trying to get it on there. So I really like this type of fitting. Alright, you can see how I've secured it down there. And I've made sure it's not going to hit the fan. You can see how I've run it underneath the hose here. And I've secured it using a little twist tie. I would definitely check for leaks with the gauge outside of the car, because leaking a bunch of transmission fluid all over your car, that would suck. And we'll check for leaks. I'm gonna put it back together and I'll check for leaks. Alright, it's back together. Let's check for leaks. Alright, I don't see any evidence of leaks here. And I don't see any evidence of leaks here. So we should be good. Let's get this thing adjusted. So my car has been warmed up at this time. I am in park and we're reading about, so I'm idling at about 720 RPM and it's reading about 115 PSI. So here's a cable that runs down to the transmission, and as you work the accelerator here, it pulls on the cable and the cable adjusts a pressure valve in the transmission. And the way this thing is adjusted is, first you loosen this one right here, then you loosen this one here, then you go back and you tighten this one here to about 65 inch-pounds, just around there. And then once this is loose here, which it already is, you can adjust the cable in and out. And pulling the cable out will increase the pressure, and pushing it in will decrease the pressure. And you still want to keep a little tension on the cable here. And so you can see, as I push the cable in, the pressure decreases, and as I pull the cable out, the pressure increases. Decreases, pull, increases. And we want to set around 71 PSI. So I'm going to push it in. It's about 71 right there. I'm going to slowly take it out until I see an increase. Right there. Push it back in. Right there. And I'm going to tighten up that nut right here. In drive at idle, we're at about a little bit over 70 PSI, so that's pretty good. We're in reverse, and the pressure is 115 PSI at idle, which is within spec. Alright, let's check out that 1 to 2 shift. Now that the transmission has been adjusted, that is much smoother than it was before. Alright, we solved the 2 problems we set out to originally solve. In part 2, I show how to assess the general health of the transmission while the gauge is hooked up. Or you can check out one of my other videos I have available. Or you can like, subscribe, and comment. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.